Arquitectonicas en Ultramar, Arquitectura Mestiza, and the Built Environment of the Philippines webinar series. The event is hosted by the UP Diliman College of Architecture and is part of the larger celebration of UP Diliman Arts and Culture Festival 2021. The theme for this year is Encuentro, Barricada 50, at ika-500 taon ng pagtatagpo ng Pilipinas at Espanya. The College of Architecture thus explores the influence of Spain in the Philippine built environment 500 years on. This online exhibition and webinar series will navigate the dialogical relationship between the Philippines and Spain in terms of spatial and architectural production during the colonial period. I am your host, Maureen Ann Araneta, and once again, welcome. For those joining us for the first time today, our webinar is part of the exhibit and webinar series with the same title. We just launched last week, and you may visit our exhibit website at OBRAS Arquitectónicas en Ultramar.com, or you can also catch last week's webinar and exhibit launching. Today, we continue with the second day of the webinar series with our speaker, Dr. Gerard Lico, who will be discussing colonial modernity under Spanish rule. Dr. Lico is a professor at the University of the Philippines College of Architecture, where he heads the History, Theory, and Criticism Studio Laboratory and is the director of the research office of the college. His research interests include the intersections of power relations and architecture and the history of colonial and post-colonial architecture in the Philippines. He is a multi-awarded author of publications on Philippine architecture and cultural studies, designer and curator of architectural exhibitions, and producer and director of a series of documentaries on Philippine built environments, such as Lunan, Master Builders, and Deco Decoded. He is the author of Edifice Complex, Power, Myth, and Marcos State Architecture in 2003, and Arquitectura Filipino, A History of Architecture and Urbanism in the Philippines in 2008, among others. He also serves as consulting architect of the city of Valenzuela. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome for our webinar this afternoon, Dr. Gerard Lico.
Good afternoon. I am Professor Gerard Lico, and today I'm going to discuss the infrastructures of colonial modernity. This is a narrative of how architecture and urban development affected the Philippine development in the 19th century. Through the instruments of urbanism and architecture, the Spanish colonial authorities therefore cemented their territorial and spiritual takeover in the archipelago. Thus, under a colonial framework, a systematic metamorphosis of the physical space of the colony is initiated to mechanize the civilizing and urbanizing processes which conflated colonial pledge and intimidation through the alliance of the secular and religious hegemony. In a broad historical stroke, Spanish colonialism had changed the face of the built environment in the Philippines as much as it had altered the social and cultural conditions of the colony. The Spanish conquistador succeeded in developing the archipelago's town according to their colonial urban prescription. First, the establishment of the reducción and land use pattern, then structuring the town according to the geometry of the quadricula, and the introduction of building typologies never before seen and the construction methods which can be seen through the new colonial infrastructure, where it utilized new methods of construction to express their material superiority and stylistic advancement. In the 19th century, colonial Manila was at the vortex of a social and economic maelstrom. This socio-economic climate necessitated the introduction of mechanized modes of production and the construction of infrastructural systems of modernity. So this notion of modernity relied heavily on technoscience, particularly the material of iron and steel, which are the essential ingredient in the industrial age. Colonial infrastructure and public works took shape under the auspices of the Spanish authorities in the form of port works, roads, bridges, lighthouses, waterways, sewerage system, pipe water supply, telegraph cables, train and streetcar system, and electrical power plants. These technologies adhered to the modern and leading edge technology available at that time. So we see, no, before we embark, no, on this narrative of the 19th century, let us go back, no, kung paano ang Pilipinas ay itinuring, no, na espasyo ng kolonyalismo. So remember, we have to define first what colonialism is. No? Colonialism is a practice of domination, no, which involves the subjugation of one people, no, by another, by a more powerful, groups of people. No? So colonialism is defined as control by one power over a dependent area of people. It occurs when one nation subjugates another, conquering its population and exploiting it, often forcing its own language and cultural value upon its people. So this process presupposes what anthropologists would refer to as directed change, insofar as it involves one people establishing its dominance over the other through military conquest, political domination, and some other forms of control. So, in the Philippines, so yung espasyo ay kinangker. So, there was a spiritual and territorial takeover of the colony. So, this control must be mechanized through the use of space. So, here, in this context, we see colonialism is being encoded through the colonial space. So, however, there is a overriding notion that colonialism is part of a civilizing mission. Colonial powers justified their conquest by asserting that they had a legal and religious obligation to take over the land and culture of the indigenous people they want to conquer. So, the conquering nation, in the case of the Philippines, Spain, and the United States, in the late 19th century, cast its role as a civilizing. Sinicivilize niya yung barbaric or savage colonial subject, and ini-invoke ng mga colonizer that such acts takes a form of civilizational tutelage, wherein the best interest of those whose land and people they exploited, na-uplift yung mga tao, yung mga colonial subject. So, in a way, colonialism is operated through the space that the inhabitants, the native subjects inhabit. Colonization does not only manifest itself as a mere political strategy, but it operates in a myriad of consequences which influence the life and culture of the people. And this change are geometrically encoded sa space. So, tingnan natin, di ba yung Spanish colonialism, ano ang unang ginawa? Is really to reorganize the colonial space according to an urbanizing program. So after establishing the new geometry of towns, di ba, the quadricula, the colonizer imposed their religion, economic system, and techno-cultural practices on the natives. Colonial regimes invested also in infrastructure and trade, and disseminated new urban paradigms. So, in these urban paradigms, techno-scientific architectural knowledge is transcribed through space, and then the buildings and the infrastructures of change of the colonizer are portrayed as having a superior status, having a more durable, no, material, hindi katulad ng mga natagpuan nilang mga material na made of thatch material, nipa. So instead, they use more durable material as a way to say that our buildings are more superior than yours. No? So here, in a way, there's a cultural revision, no, in terms of architecture. So of course, we know, no, we are celebrating 500 years, no, of Christianity in the Philippines, but Christianity was just one of the instruments, no, of pacification. No? So, di ba, God, gold, and glory, no, the three G's ang ano niya, no? So, the reduction was an instrument of control, no? So this forced urbanization or resettlement, no, attempted to gather, no, the scattered populace, no? 'Di ba kasi according to one account, the Filipino, no, the early Filipinos had no tradition of urbanism or town planning. Instead, we live, no, in a settlement pattern that is sporadic, near bodies of water or nasa bundok, no? So in order for the colonizers to control, no, kasi kokonti lang naman silang mga Spanish military, how do you control the people na scattered? So you gather them, no, in one compact town and then facilitate religious conversion and cultural change. And after, so kung makikita natin the geometry itself, no, of the colonial town planning, yung tinatawag nating quadricula. Quadricula is basically great iron pattern, was prescribed, no, by the laws of the Indies by King Philip II. These are sets of ordinances, no, that were learned from their experience in the town planning exercises in the New World, no, in Latin America. So we see here that the grid is the most convenient geometry to control, no, and to identify along the matrices kung sino yung potentially disruptive dun sa social order, no? And as prescribed, no, in the laws of the Indies, the church, no, would be the most dominant, no, architectural form in the colonial townscape. So in a way, when we look at the theories of Foucault, no, the bell tower, the tall bell tower, and the church becomes a panoptic instrument, no, wherein the natives, no, when they see the tall bell tower, would impose upon themselves, no, self-discipline and self-regulation, because it's as if they are being observed, no, by an unknown observer, no, in the bell tower, in the tall bell tower. So that's a way of control, no, and of course you have to defend the colony, no, from other potential colonizer. That's why there was a huge investment in building, no, forts, no, fortifications, defensive architecture like this one in Zamboanga. So, but the walled city, no, the fortified walled city, is an instrument of exclusivity, no, to protect the purity of the Spanish blood, no? Yun. So it's a space of exclusive. So may illusion tayo na ang Intramuros ay para sa Pilipino, hindi, no? It's for the exclusive use of the Spaniards, no? So katulad ng sabi ko, yung quadricula was really a form of social control, no? It's an apparatus of control, no? So the quadricula geometry was an efficient method in maximizing the utilization of space, no? And at the same time, because nga the grid is the most efficient, no, geometry, no, madali mong masusupervise at makikita yung colonial subjects mo, di ba? Kasi you want to to control them, no? So ito yung mga examples sa Batangas, no? So makikita natin in this townscape yung So unti-unti, syempre, you have to create, no, a form of order, no, before you can enact yung modernism, no? Yung modernizing processes, no? Kailangan establish mo muna yung discipline, no? So makikita natin, looming over the landscape, no, in this picture is the bell tower, no? Being the dominant, no? The dominant structure, no? In the townscape. So also, the Spanish colonizer introduced, new building typologies and architectural styles. So these are the formal language of architecture. So the urbanization of the colonial landscape necessitated the creation of new institutions represented by building types that carried functional and formal analogy. Take for example the church. Meron siyang direct function for worship, school for learning, prison for incarceration. Building typology provided a regulative principle of governing the formal and practical aspect of colonial architecture. Kasi let's look at the architecture prior to colonization. It's just parang uniform, no? There is no hierarchy of function because multifunctional yung mga spaces, no? At pare-pareho sila ng material, ng materiality, bamboo. Siguro na iba lang ang scale, but more or less hindi mo madidistinguish yung bahay versus sa communal or ritualistic space, no? More so that we do not have, a space for worship because of the animist tradition that we have. So we worship, or we worship the spirit, in nature. So when they introduce, the simbahan, the physical simbahan or sambahan, they use, the tradition ng mga Pilipino of worshiping. So kumbaga na transcode lang yung yung pag-worship sa mga elemento sa nature dun sa mga santo. So at yung mga anito, nagkaroon ng muka sa pamamagitan ng mga santo. So here makikita rin natin yung paggamit ng arkitektura, as a form of attraction, as an alluring mechanism, to convince or persuade the natives to participate, in the spectacle of the new religion. So yung simbahan dito, di ba, pakikita natin, merong sense of monumentality at gumagamit ng mga European style. So so yung building typologies also created, social distinction, mark of taste, especially nung na-develop, yung bahay na bato, mamaya pag-usapan natin. So ito, for example sa Intramuros, yung Intramuros initially, gawa lang siya sa mga touch material, but later on, nasusunog siya. So actually, kung mapapansin, kung babalikan natin yung yung kasaysayan ng arkitekturang Pilipino, yung development ng Philippine architecture was a consequence, of how we respond, to calamities and disaster, So halimbawa, yung Intramuros, nasunog siya, dahil nga dun sa material niya, botanic, highly flammable. So pinalitan siya ng mga bato. Kaso nagkalindol, so the earthquake revealed the weakness of masonry architecture, na it's not mag-work sa sa seismically active territories like the Philippines. So in a way, they developed the Arquitectura Mestiza, which combines the properties of stone and wood. Arquitectura Mestiza meaning hybrid. So ito yung sinaunang simbahan. So simple lang, simple. So building typologies, mga hotel, katulad ng Hotel Oriente, eskwelahan, hotel, at spaces of incarceration. So nagkaroon na ng mga specific buildings for specific social need. So urban life, is being created, new lifestyle. Pero in creating this infrastructure, you need labor. So kanino sila humingi ng ng suporta para sa construction activities. Siyempre, hindi sa mga Pilipino. No? So, they imported no, Chinese labor. No? So, they saw the Chinese no, as a subservient supplier no, of labor. So, actually, from the Chinese, we learned, no? Kasi we don't have the tradition of building in stone, no? So, yung masonry construction, we learned through the Chinese builders. No? So, we heavily relied no, on Chinese labor. So, ngayon, dumami yung mga Chinese. Yung mga Chinese was relegated to working no, in construction, di ba? Yung word na Pacquiao, no, yung galing yan sa no, building practices attributed to the Chinese method of providing no, building services, yung Pacquiao, no? Not Manny Pacquiao. No? Okay, but yun, no? But no, kung mapapansin din natin yung they were also the Spaniards were also insecure no, about the Chinese. So they had no a specific place, no? So sabi ko nga sa inyo, yung Intramuros hindi siya purely para siya sa mga European. So yung mga Chinese were outside, no? Were placed outside the walls, no? In the district of Parian. So yung Parian was initially located at the site near today in the Metropolitan Theater, no? That area in Arroceros. So because that area was maaabot siya ng kanyon just in case na magre-rebelde itong mga Chino na ito, madali mo silang masusuppress kasi they are at cannon point, no? Di ba? Tapos isa pang isa pang ginawa ng mga Spaniards kasi nga they cannot entirely rely on the Chinese and the Filipinos. Ay yung mga loyalty kasi you have to create colonial loyalties. No? So anong ginawa nila? So they had to force intermarry, no? The Chinese and the Filipinos. No? The Chinese had to be Christianized as well, no? So this forced intermarriage would develop, no, what we call a new class, no? Yung mga mestizo class. This mestizo class will be trusted, no, by the Spanish, and sila yung pagkakatiwalaan kasi wala silang loyalty sa pure loyalty sa Chinese, wala rin silang pure loyalty sa Filipino. So kakampi sila sa sa Spaniard. So in a way, no, this because loyal, no, so sila yung bibigyan ng mga ng mga parcel of land that will be developed into encomienda, hacienda, no, and this mestizo class, no, will become the ilustrado later, no? So they would amass, no, magi-enjoy sila ng yayaman sila, no, yayaman sila, especially at the time of cash crop agriculture, yung mga tobacco monopoly. So sila yung magkakaroon ng mga bahay na bato, no? So sa kanila natin sila yung magde-develop, no, ng bahay na bato later. So balik tayo dito sa Parian. So kung titingnan natin ngayon ang this Parian is in the at the site of the Metropolitan Theater at saka yung Universidad de Manila, yung Arroceros Forest, no? So tingnan natin, no? So dito wala na yung So actually, how do we prove na may mga Chinese presence diyan? So when we were digging for the Metropolitan Theater, we saw, no, fragments, no, of jars, no, Chinese porcelain, no? Okay, so yung mga basag-basag na Chinese porcelain, and we saw, no, Chinese grade markers, no? More so mga bones. So yeah, so it's an archaeological site, no? So going back to Intramuros is a medieval fortress, no? So siya, no? Talagang may drawbridge yan. So every night, no, kailangan itataas mo yung drawbridge para nga to protect, no, yung pagiging exclusive ng espasyo. So walang Pilipino or other nationalities na dapat makita dito pagkagat ng dilim. So, naging posible lang ito, no, yung pagtayo ng so pag sinabi ko kasi parang fortress kasi napapaligiran siya ng body of water na tinatawag nating moat or fosso. No? So, it's part of the defense apparatus of fortress architecture. So, the intramuros was done also in the bastion system. No? Okay. So, kung nakikita natin, so may water feature all around. It's surrounded. But today, you can no longer see it because during the American period, it was filled up. Because sa tingin ng mga Amerikano, this was the source of malaria at that time. So instead, ginawa siyang golf course ngayon, di ba? So this is Intramuros. So Intramuros was created using a material made of volcanic tuff. No? So its strategic location near the mouth of Pasig River. So Pasig River was instrumental in the development of Intramuros, the walled city. Bakit? Kasi Antonio Cedeño discovered a quarry of volcanic tuff in Guadalupe in Makati. So this is the quarry. Kita natin this picture was an aerial photograph taken in the 1930s. You can still see the adobe quarry in Guadalupe. We call it Guadalupe stone, by the way. So actually, when you look at it, katabi niya yung yung present day na Guadalupe Church. So malapit siya sa EDSA. So diyan kinakwari, technological siya kasi it's a new material, so it's always been in the Philippines, but for the first time gumamit tayo ng bato sa architecture. So instrumental nga yung position ng malapit sa Pasig kasi through the Pasig River doon tinatransport yung mga bato para mabuo yung stone fortification ng Intramuros. So actually in the 1950s makikita pa rin natin yung mga stone quarry na to. So actually ginamit nga siyang set sa pelikula ni Manuel Conde, yung Genghis Khan. So it's actually shot in Guadalupe, Makati. So di ba pag dumadaan kayo sa LRT, napakahili ng terrain na yun. So imagine nyo during that time that it's a pristine landscape. So, sabi ko sa inyo, importante yung role ng mga Chino sa construction. So, natuto tayo ng masonry construction, at saka yung Spaniards inintroduce nila yung paggamit ng lime, paggamit ng ng iba't ibang material na mas matibay. So Chino, so this Chino, una yung mga Chino, naging labor. Pero later on, they will evolve into entrepreneurs, pag-evolve sila ng bagong building typology, yung tinatawag natin shop houses. Okay, so this is the Plaza Mayor of Manila, wherein you see the most important buildings of the colony. The Plaza Mayor, you see there the Manila Cathedral before it was destroyed by the earthquake in the mid-19th century, and the Palacio and the Ayuntamiento. So, by the way, archaeological diggings would reveal na gumamit ng bagong technology dito in the form of inverted jars sa foundation. So makikita nyo dito yung kasi sa Makati at that time during the Spanish period, diyan pinoproduce yung nandiyan yung mga kiln, ginagamit yung mga ladrillo, brick, diyan pinoproduce, at saka yung mga jars. So itong mga jars na to ginagamit in inverted orientation bago ilatag yung floor, kasi ito yung in a way ito yung nagpipigil ng ng flooding through capillary action. So, kung gusto niyo makita kung ano yung sinasabi ko inverted jar, pag pumunta kayo sa ayuntamiento, sa basement doon, may museum at nandoon intact yung mga inverted jars na yun. So, simbahan, no? Simbahan was an instrument, no, of pacification. Through the spectacle of religion at mga fiestas, the Filipinos were allured to the religion. No? So, the friars, no, these were built, no, by architects, no? Architects who are also priests, no? So mapapansin din natin the stylistic, no, trajectory, no, of the Filipino Baroque churches are mix and match, no? So it just approximated European models, no? So it relied on the memory of the friar of the style they encountered in Europe at dinala dito. So makikita natin puro mga falls, baluster. So it's tapal-tapal, mix and match, no? But in Miagao, you will see that there's an attempt, no, to introduce Filipino motif, no, or Filipino vegetation, no, in the form of coconut tree at the center of the pediment and the papaya and guava trees, no, creating, no, or mimicking the lush tropical landscape, no, of Iloilo. So it's like, so magdidepende din yung no, type of material, no. So pag sa ito, for example, limestone, no, depende kasi sa availability ng material. So coralline limestone, minsan adobe, no? Depende, no? Depende. So, makita rin natin sa Betis, no? Very elaborate, no? Very elaborate yung retablo. So, the rise of the Ilustrado, no? The rise of the new social class, no? In the 19th in the 17th to 18th century, no, created a new domestic prototype, no, the bahay na bato, no? So the bahay na bato combined, no, the flexibility of wood, no, and the sturdiness, no, of stone. So actually, if you are to structurally analyze the bahay na bato, no, it's the structural system is basically ang nag-work talaga is the wooden framework, no? So the stone, no, on the ground floor acts merely as a skirt, no, concealing the legs, no, the legs of the house, which rises from ground to the roof, no. So it carries the roof system as well. So as I mentioned, malaki ang ginampanan ng mga Chino sa development ng Spanish colonial architecture. Kung makikita natin, the bahay na bato is a logical continuum of the bahay kubo, no? So sa baba, walang gamit. Ganon din ito, yung sagwan. So it's actually the living floor space is on the second level, no? Okay? So here, you will see also yung yung slope, no? Yung slope yung may graceful curve, no? Yung roof, no? It's very Chinese, no? And even the system, no? The window system, no? It's very Chinese. Yung sliding, no? Sliding, it's very East Asian, no? By the way, no? Except that instead of paper, shells were used, no? As a way to create privacy and filter light within. Okay, that's the kapis window. So, of course, it's an introduction, and yet we are able to transform it, no? To transform it using our own available resources. No? In this case, the placuna placenta, or the kapis shells. Okay, so the bahay na bato was was a result, no, of an evolution, 2 centuries of evolution of the Philippine domestic architecture. It accommodated a variety of style from revivalism, from classical architecture, Gothic architecture, no? And even Victorian architecture. So, this is how versatile the bahay na bato is. No? Okay? So, even nung Art Nouveau period, no? Nagkaroon din no, yung interior. So, it's highly, it is capable of accommodating no, the trends and styles of the day. So, this is Quiapo, no? This is Quiapo. So, unti-unting na-develop yung yung urban, no? Yung urban space, no? Pero in Quiapo, no, you see organized pa rin siya according to the quadricula. So, the church with the plaza, no, is the dominant feature of the townscape. So, unti-unti, yung urban life is being developed. No? So, with urban life, you have to create no, spaces of leisure. Take for example, again, yung Parian, na-convert siya into hardin botaniko. No? So, nilipat yung mga Chinese. No? Kasi there was a time na nagkaroon ng rebellion. So, at a certain radius from Intramuros, wala dapat settlement. No? Kaya, na-mark off. So, yung mga Chino nalipat sa Binondok, or today, we call it Binondo. So, the spaces no, beyond Intramuros is known as extramuros. No? Extramuros or arrabales. No? So suburbs. No? Suburbs. So, notice the importance of Hardin Botaniko. Ano ba yung function ng Hardin Botaniko? This is the Hardin Botaniko as proposed in 1876. So, meron siyang meron siyang iba't ibang parte. This could have been a beautiful colonial garden kung nandun lang siya ngayon. Ano yung function ng Hardin Botaniko? In a colonial context, the Hardin Botaniko or colonial, yung yung iba sa may mga colonizers, may mga gardens yan. No? Because this is a site no, wherein they test no, the economic potential of plants, no, its medicinal value and its agricultural value as cash crop agriculture. So malaking ginagamparan nito even pag magi-introduce sila ng ng ibang klaseng halaman, it's a way to dito ipinopropagate or inacclimatize before dalhin sa natural habitat. So in a way, it's a transitional space. No? So the Hardin Botaniko, it's a pleasure. It's a civic space. No? So may teatro, no? Sa gitna yung Teatro Principe Alfonso. So really, after all dividing the space, no? They created a new urban lifestyle in the 19th century. Also, with sanitary reform, kasi remember, yung mga libingan dati ay malapit no? or within no? the church ground. So because of the sanitary reform of the 19th century, inilipat no? yung mga sementeryo no? Sa periphery ng syudad. No? So for example, yung Paco Park, no? May kita natin, hindi pa siya natatapos pero nagamit na siya noong 1830s na nagkaroon ng cholera outbreak. No? So, at malayo siya, no? About a kilometer away from the city center, which is Intramuros at that time. So, at that time, it's yung Paco was a suburb. No? So, yan. So, it's circular in plan, no? At tignan natin yung multi-level yung mga nicho, no? So makikita sa picture na it's well plastered, no? It's whitewashed, no? And then you have the the cemetery chapel, no? So this is the Paco Cemetery today, no? Which has been transformed, no? The Paco Cemetery has been transformed into an urban oasis, no? Yung kanyang yung kanyang nakakatakot, no? Na past have been hindi naman na-erase, no? But rather have been transformed, no? By by the genius of I.P. Santos in the 1960s. So, di ba, Concert at the Park, no? Yun. Anyway, so ito, makikita natin, this is, may kalye dyan, no? May kalye dyan, ang tawag Dulong Bayan, no? So, Dulong Bayan, in this 19th century map, no? Siya na yung border ng ng Maynila. No? Siya na yung dulo ng bayan, Dulong Bayan. Dulong Bayan today is, pero natatandaan ko yung lola ko, punta tayo sa Dulong Bayan, no? Magpapagawa siya doon ng mga alahas sa Dulong Bayan. Pero ano ba yung Dulong Bayan? Yung pala, yung Dulong Bayan ay today sa Recto, no? Sa Recto, no? Recto area. So yung Dulong Bayan, beyond the Dulong Bayan, doon itinayo yung mga sementeryo, katulad ng sementeryo ng mga Chino, no? At saka yung yan, yung sa La Loma, no? Yan, nakikita natin yung pulang area dyan sa mapa. We shift now to define what colonial modernity is. So, by means of colonial modernity, we are actually experiencing the condition, no, that characterizes modernity within the colonial space. Normally kasi colonial modernity occurs in the metropole, then it trickles down to the colonial spaces. But I guess it's a dialogue naman, no, between the metropole and the colony. So, what are the conditions of modernity? It is apart from being a historical stage, it's a point in the development of the society wherein there's a revolutionary shift, no? Wherein the society becomes more positivistic, no? What do we mean by positivistic? Knowledge and truth systems could be verified by means of scientific inquiry, no? And then it's technocentric. There's a heavy reliance, no, on technology, no, and the sciences, no? Technocentric in this case kasi this is the age of iron, no? So the new material paved the way, no, for the construction, no, of new building typologies, no, and the creation of new economic systems, no, particularly leading to capitalism, no? And then it's rationalistic, meaning that knowledge is achieved through application of reason, no? So yun. But in the Philippines, no, the advent of colonial modernity can be traced back in 1834, no, with the abolition of the Compañía de Filipinas, the Royal Company of the Philippines, no, which by royal decree had the exclusive privilege of trade between Spain and the Philippines. So the company's bankruptcy, no, prompted the Spanish crown to open the port of Manila, no, to world trade and to relax restriction against foreign traders that year, no. The opening of the Philippines to global trade resulted in a great demand for its agricultural products and processed commodities in the world market. So this necessitated the use of machineries, no, for massive processing, no, needed for export production. So as Manila became an entrepot, trading houses owned by various nationalities soon established offices, no, and branches in Manila. So this establishment brought in many European goods to the colony, no? Soon after, foreign consulates, no, opened in Manila to protect the economic interest of their countries and their expat citizens, no? By the end of 1859, there were about 15 foreign firms, no, operating in Manila, 7 of which were British, 3 were American, 2 French, 2 Swiss, and 1 German. So the British and Americans reigned supreme, no, in foreign trade. The British ventured in exportation of sugar and Manila hemp, and importation of machinery employed in the manufacture of sugar, iron sheet, coal tar, paints, and textile. So the English introduced, no, in a way, mechanized milling of rice and processing of sugar. So the Americans, no, prized the Manila hemp or abaca as it was in demand among the shipbuilders in the east coast of the United States. So in 1834, no, Sinibaldo de Mas was commissioned, no, by the King of Spain, no, to study the economic, no, economic condition of the Philippines, and he recommended, among others, the improvements, no, and the opening of ports, no, in the Philippines, no, and the allowing, no, the immigration of Chinese, no, so as to further, no, the agricultural development, no, of the countryside. So there was a lot of port improvement. Ports, no, are essential, no, component, no, to integrate Manila, no, and other port cities across the Philippines, to integrate it in the global networks, no, of trade. So with ports, there will be, a lot of global trade. No? So we need, no, ano ba yung mga kailangan mo, no? Ano ba yung kailangan mo to facilitate? So in the mid-19th century, there was also a need, no, to build lighthouses, no, to guide oncoming, no, sea vessels, no, arriving. No? So there was 55 lighthouses, no, that were planned to be constructed all over, no, the archipelago. So one of the interesting lighthouse that was produced during this period was the lighthouse designed by Jose Echeverria, no, in 1876, no, which was completed in 1879. No? So it's unique because it's made of metal, no? It's made of iron. No? So gumamit ito ng cast iron screw piles, no, designed by Alexander Mitchell, no, an engineer from Belfast. So what's so interesting about this faro, no? Faro San Nicolas. So San Nicolas is the, ito yung pagpasok ng Pasig River, no? Is that the metal components, no, were ordered, no, from the foundry of Gustav Eiffel. So we have so most of our requirements, no, for steel, iron were from France and Belgium. So so later on, we will have the Pasig Farola, no? So in Pasig River. So even up to this day, no, that area, no, where the Farola can be found is still known as Farola District. No? So there's a lot, no? There's a lot of lighthouses, no? or Farola, no? Built all over the country. So even yung gumamit din ng Fresnel, no? Lenses, no? Okay. And when I was in Sevilla, I was amazed to see the plan, no, for a bridge, no, for ito, Puente de Hierro, no, sobre el Rio de Pasig. So this is the bridge, no, supposed to be built, no, in the mid 19th century, no, in Pasig River. So this was on display, no, in the archive, no, the archive in Sevilla. So it's it uses, no, a lot of metal components, no, but the you see the tower, no, with crenellations, no? So this is the model, no? This is the model. However, this was not complete. Hindi siya na-implement, no? Instead, what we have is the 1875 Puente de España, no? Which is composed of 8 arches, no? 8 arches, no? And the two center, no, arches are made of iron. No? So it's very famous. And the yung mga lighting fixtures niya, yung mga branching lamps, no, were imported, no, from France. So this is the an image, no, of the Pasig River with the Puente de España. So tingnan nyo kung gaano kababaw, no, yung Pasig River. So in order for it to be navigable, it needs to be drenched, no. Yan. So another picture, no, of that bridge, the Puente de España. So the Puente de España was replaced by in the 1920s by a bridge, no, designed by Juan Arellano, the Jones Bridge. So another important bridge is the Claveria Bridge, no, also known as Puente Colhante. No? So it's a pedestrian bridge, no, completed in 1852. It's the first suspension bridge in Asia. No? It's a toll bridge, meaning you have to pay, no, a certain amount in order for you to cross it. No? And then Ayala operated this. So kita natin suspended yung kanyang by means of tension, no? tension wires, no? And then we have the Ayala Bridge, no? Ayala Bridge, which is a steel bridge, no? So it's still there, but it's an iteration. So sabi nila, no, it's a design by Gustav Eiffel. So but I doubt it, no? This is so, diba, yung gitna niya, no, gitna niya leads to the Isla Convalencia, no? Kung saan makikita mo yung Hospicio de San Jose. So luckily, no, diba there are rumors that Gustav Eiffel siya daw nag-design ng Puente Colhante. It's really false, no? So we found the official catalog, no, of Gustav Eiffel, no? So actually ito yung kanyang dinisenyo na bridge, no, the Puentecillo de Eiffel, no, na makikita, no, crossing the Pasig River. So it's a small bridge, no, at from his official catalog, no, makikita natin marami siyang ginawang bridge all over the Philippines. Did you know that, no? Including that some parts of bridge in Santa Cruz, Laguna, no, in 1890. This bridge, no, in 1890 also, in Simala in Cebu in 1891, in Calamba, no, a bridge in Calamba in 1892, bridge in Tanawan in Batangas in 1892, and bridge in San Miguel, Bulacan in 1892, and a bridge, no, crossing, no, River Hanipan in Iloilo in 1898. So ito yung nasa official catalog. So by 1880s, no, 1887, there was a huge investment, no, in the improvement, no, of ports of Manila. So it is actually kita natin dito na there are, no, very busy, no, improving the port of Manila, because talaga ang Manila is an important emporia, no. So yeah, so there's a lot of dredging going on. So even yung revista, no, de Obras Publicas, no? So ito yung publication about architecture and engineering. So many of the many of the engineering development, no, in the colonies, no, are featured, no, in this publication. So what is noticeable dito sa publication na to, there nagsisimula ng gumamit, no, ng reinforced concrete, no, because reinforced concrete was being pioneered, no, in Paris, no, in Belgium. So itong mga so there was the use of, they call it cemento armado, no, or reinforced concrete. So inintroduce ito, no, slightly dito sa Pilipinas, pero it did not take off because of the supply, no. We do not have the supply of Portland cement at that time. So the use of reinforced concrete, no, as a material of modernity, no, will be pursued, no, it will be pursued by the American colonial regime, no. Makikita natin ito because they really, no, sought to find, no, the quarry, no, to harness, the Portland cement. So they found eventually the quarry for cement in Binangon and Rizal. So as I mentioned earlier, no, Philippine architecture, or the improvement, no, of architecture, was brought about, no, by several calamities and disasters. So we all know that yung mga hurricane, yung mga bagyo, no, it easily topples mga thatch houses, no, tulad nito. So even earthquake, no. So actually, the earthquake, no, of July 1880, no, which destroyed many of the buildings of Manila, so was a watershed event, no, in terms of a revolution, no, in Philippine architecture. Why? Because it started, no, there's a decree, no, replacing, no, all the heavy tile roof, no, with hierro gabal, ano, no, GI sheets, no, or hierro galvanizado, no, we call it, no. That hierro, no, of course, was also imported, no, but later on it was manufactured in the country. So because most of the buildings that was destroyed, no, during the earthquake, ang cause ng death, ang cause ng destruction was the heavy roof tile. So the replacement, no, of the heavy roof tile allowed for ano, no, lighter material, no, so which is hierro, no? So this is an example, no? So yeah, no, kita natin dito sa example natin, no, na bumagsak yung mga bahay, no? So this one, no, look at this picture, no? You will see here the ano, no, itong mga bahay na to, no? Bahay na ba to, no? Pero na-replace yung kanilang roof, instead of tile, naging GI sheets na. So here. So yung mga destruction also, no, in terms of sa churches, also prompted, no, the creation, no, of an earthquake-proof, no, church, no. Alam naman natin ito. This is very famous, no? The all-steel church, no, of San Sebastian, no? So which were prefabricated, in Belgium, and then shipped to the Philippines piece by piece. So actually, no, ang isa pang extant na ano, no, na steel church can be found in Turkey, no? Okay, but today, no, because it's more than 100 years, the church, no, may mga corrosion. Yun ang problema ng iron, corrosion. So, but it's a beautiful, no, it's a beautiful building. So another innovation, no, that was introduced, no, kasi lumalaki na, no, lumalaki na yung Maynila, no, nag-expand na yung mga arabales. So Intramuros, no, is expanding, no, to include, no, the arabales. So to go around the city, they need, no, a convenient transportation system in the form of tranvia. So here, no, here in this map, you will see the network of tranvia. So slowly it will expand as the city expands, especially during the American period. But initially, the tranvia, no, was horse-driven, no. So this one, I think this is a tranvia, no, in plying the district of Malabon, no, because of the Malabon church here. So another revolutionary, no, technology that was introduced during the Spanish colonial period was the ferrocarril, no, or the iron horse, no, the train. So the train facilitated, no, the exploration of the hinterland, no, and the efficient extraction of resources, no, dun sa mga provinces. It also facilitated travel, no, and migration, no? So this is a beautiful train station, the Tutuban train station. By the way, the train system that we have was the contract, no, to build it was awarded to a British company. So the the train system, even the train stations that we have are of British standard. So they are made of brick, normally brick. So today we still have the Tutuban train station, but reincarnated as a mall, as a mall in Divisoria. So by the way, importante yung mapapansin din natin na yung immediate surrounding ng area, yung Tondo, provided the space for the migrant from the provinces, at saka yung mga galing sa Visayas, yung sa barko, kasi nandyan din ang port, nandyan din ang tren, so it's a logical place for settlement, kasi nandyan din sa tabi niyan yung Binondo, kung saan nandun ang mga factory at saka mga almacen o warehouses. So people from the provinces would want to partake in the industrialization. So gusto nilang kumita. So sa Binondo, ang daming mga madaming mga businesses, warehouses, So even yung mga esteros, they were dredged, because in the absence of road network at that time, the esteros were the network of colonial commerce and exchange. So yung Estero de Binondo, this is Estero de Binondo. Yan, ito yung pabrika, Another building type, that was a product of industrialization was the factory or fabrika. So pabrika, most of them were engaged in tobacco, like the insular tobacco factory, o kaya Masic, yung Masic tobacco factory. So it's all about processing. Normally, ang mga kababaihan nung time na ito were employed as sigarera, So ang mga kababaihan, so Women's Month ngayon, ang mga babae noong 19th century, ang kanilang work ay limited sa pagiging labandera, tindera, or sigarera. Pero some of them live a double life. So some of them were engaged in prostitution because nga maraming foreigners. So meron ding mga illicit urban activities such as prostitution. So, another thing that happened because of Manila's uncontrolled urban density at saka yung pagtatayo ng mga bahay kubo sa urban precinct necessitated the zoning of Manila into napakasimpleng zonification. It conveniently divide the city into two. So, the zone for materiales fuertes, yung mga bahay na bato, at saka yung zone for houses built of light material. Yon. So, actually, ang tawag doon, so kung makikita natin dito sa image na to, ito yung mapa ng Maynila, meron diyang 50 meter line, It's a fire line break dividing the city. Kasi di ba sa Tondo, yun yung mga areas of congestion. Doon yung mga migrant laborer. Sa mga Binondo, San Nicolas, nandyan yung mga, sa Quiapo, Santa Cruz, nandyan yung mga houses of strong material district. So, nakakonvert. Kasi many of the urban fires that happened in the mid-19th century can be attributed doon sa mga bahay kubo sa Arabales, So nadadamay. So pag tumabi ka sa bahay na bato, you will be demolished, So ito yung so may class clash, nung panahon na to. Alam niyo ba kung anong tawag diyan sa na yan? Sa line na yan? It's a fire line break dividing the city into two. So today, it's called Divisoria. So today, the Divisoria we know is a district for buying cheap or an inexpensive goods. So it's a wholesale district. But in fact, the toponym Divisoria is attributed to that urban divisor. Okay? So with urban migration, new building typologies were invented. No? So yung bahay na bato, no? Na-develop into compartmentalized, no? Series of apartments known as accessoria. So merong no, instead na isang unit siya, naging several apartments siya, several units with its own door, no? So katulad nito, in plan you will see that merong no, separate no, entry for each unit, merong kusina, no? Unique kusina at the back, no? Living spaces in the middle, no? But you have a common, no? At the back you have a common toilet or latrina. No? So these are some examples. So maraming pintuan, no? Several doors, but one building. Okay? Okay? So you have a sala, kwarto. So pinaliit, no? So it's an urban apartment made affordable for migrant laborers. So this is an example of an accessoria. Okay. So one thing that yung pagdating ng mga businesses sa Maynila was the development, no, of the bahay na bato typology, no. So di ba yung sagwan, no? Sagwan had no function before, no, apart from being a storage space, no, for the karwahes or karosas, no. So now in the commercial district, the shop houses are now converted into double function na. So sa taas, the house of residence, and sa baba, the business, no? So normally, yung nakatira sa taas is the proprietor of the business. So pwede siyang butika, pwede siyang ice cream parlor, no? Pwede siyang iba't ibang negosyo, pwedeng iba-iba. So it can accommodate, no? So it's an example of Philippine shop houses. So pwedeng pharmacy, no? Pwedeng restaurant, pwedeng dress shop, no? So for example, no, in the district of Escolta, you have a cafe, no, at the ground floor, and on the second level, this is the Victoria Cafe, pero on the second level there is this atelier, no, atelier of Arellano. So actually, this is the building now, no? This building, the site of this building is now occupied by the Regina building, the Victoria Cafe, and on the other side, it's now the First United, no? Kung saan nandun yung mga yung nire-reactivate ngayon ng mga millennials as a boutique, no? As a boutique store, no? Diba? For heritage enthusiasts. So tingnan nyo, even Escolta at the beginning of the century or the late 19th century was puro bahay na bato typology, pero yung ground floor was a commercial and business space. So katulad nito, no, mga bazaar, no, butika, no, butika, German dispensary, drugstore, patahian ng damit, no? So nakakatuwa. But ngayon halos wala na itong mga ganitong mga shop houses. Pwede ring tindahan ng mga jewelry, hardware, no? Ngayon, pero we know shop houses now are limited to being a hardware. So like the Mariano with Chaco, no? So with the foreigners coming in to Manila, so may mga hotels, no? For example, Oriente Hotel, no? So this is the plaza, no, in Binondo. This is in front of the Binondo Church, no? The large building, no, is the Insular, no? Insular Tobacco Factory, and the extreme most building, no, with those arcades, no? is a hotel, no? Hotel de Oriente. No? This is the picture of the Hotel Oriente. So most of the building, regardless of function, emanates from the bahay na buto, no? Formula, no? Kaya lang minsan may atrium sa gitna, no? Pati yung mga eskwela, no? So apart from apart from mga monumental buildings, yung mga commercial shop houses, meron din naman mga businesses na nag-flourish, no? In the 19th century, for example, yung mga pansiteria, yung mga karinderya, no? Like this, no? Karihan, no? Karihan. Pansiteria, ready to eat food, no? Ready to eat food at may mababang dulang, no? Tapos another institution, no, that was that emerged during this time was the sari-sari store, no, which dispensed, no, merchandise, no, in small quantities or tigi-tigi. No? This is an example of a neighborhood sari-sari store, which up to now we continue this tradition of retailing, no, in our neighborhoods. So ito yung sari-sari store in the late 19th century. Okay, so illicit form, no, of vice, no, also flourished, no, in business district like in Binondo, no. So it was legal for the Chinese, no, to consume opium, no. So they were taxed, no, for this, but Filipinos are not allowed, no, to engage in opium consumption. So these spaces are regulated. This is an example of an opium den, no, in Manila. So high na high sila, no? High na high. Okay. So kaya nga, no, sinasabi nga sa inyo, the oldest profession, no, ay nagmanifest din sa nasa Binondo. Binondo became a red light district. So ang mga prostitutes o mga bordel, no, ay no, hindi not necessarily Filipino yung mga kababaihan, no? Most of them were Japanese and Russians, no? They are migrants, no? Pupunta sila dito to work, no? And then magpapadala sila ng pera sa kanilang mga bansa. Ito mga karayukisan, no? Karayukisan, these are Japanese prostitutes, no, in the Philippines, no? But today the tables are turned. Okay, so with rising criminality, you need spaces of incarceration, no? Like the Bilibid prison, no, in Santa Cruz. So ang dami, no, with colonial modernity comes a barrage, no, of new building typologies to cater to emerging needs of the society, no? Okay, so this is actually the building is beautiful, no? But this bahay, again, the typical typology is bahay na bato. So even schools, no, educational institution also employed the bahay na bato typology, except that there's a huge, no, atrium, open courtyard, no, at the center, no, to allow for playing, for games. This is I think one of the schools inside Intramuros. So another entertainment, no, form was the theater. No? Theater came in the form of teatro, no, open theater, no, or teatro na ganito. This is the Teatro Principe Alfonso, no, which is located today near the Metropolitan Theater. Nasunog siya, no? So this is Teatro de Binondo, and this is the Teatro Circo de Bilibid, no? So ito yung itsura ng typical na teatro ng 19th century. So it's like a opera house, no? So another vice, no, brought about by modernity, syempre mga gambling, no? So may mga gambling din. Pero sa Pilipino, ang hindi talaga maiwasan ay sabong. Sabong is really an institution, no? So na-legitimize at na-control naman ang game ng sabong sa pamamagitan ng pagpapatayo ng colonial authorities ng mga sabungan. no? So in terms of water, no? Water is an essential ingredient, no, in city formation, no? So pipe water system was introduced, no, by the Carriedo system, no? So yung may El Deposito sa San Juan, so water originates from Marikina River, then channeled to the El Deposito, which is the parang reservoir, and then by gravity it's carried to the city, no? Parang aqueduct, but nakapipe, no? So this picture was taken from one of the esteros in San Juan, no? So the water was distributed, no, throughout the city by means of a hydrant, no? So water emanating from this hydrant were free of charge, no? So it was given for free to the public, no? Because Carriedo, no, gave, no, an amount, no, to the city, no, as a gift, no, to develop the pipe water system. And the hydrant is iconic, no, for its lion head mascaron, no? But did you know that it is imported, no? It is imported from Ireland, I think Ireland, no? Ireland. So it was designed, no? It used a design patented by Phil Kennedy. No? Let me correct that. It's imported from Scotland. No? So this is the catalog. No? So even up to this day, marami pa rin in Europe, marami pa rin mga hydrant, no? Water hydrant, no? Drinking fountain na ganyan. So we see this the black and gold. No? This is still you can find this inside the Paco Cemetery. No? Okay? So this is the cross section. No? This is the cross section of the fountain. So itong iron pillar fountain na to, it's an example of an industrial, no? An industrial product imported from Europe, no? So you just order via catalog, no? Apart from this, water, no, was also fed to the fountains, no? What is this fountain? Saan to makikita tong fountain na to? Would you know? No? So this is actually the Tan Kim Seng fountain. It's not the Carriedo fountain. Again, the water, no? Itong fountain na to was also ordered, no, from a catalog, no, from Andrew Hayside and Company in Derby in England, no? So ito yung sa atin, no? The Tan Kim Seng fountain, the Tan Kim Seng fountain in Singapore, no? In Singapore, halos kapareho ng design, nung sa atin, sa Pilipinas. Yun. So it's not actually unique. Meron din ito sa Brazil, no? So if you want to know more about this fountain, you can actually view, no, a short documentary on this fountain at Lico, no? So it's ornate, no? It's may mga muses, no, and all. So in a way, merong mass production, no? May mass production. By the way, yung tubig na nag-emanate dito is drinkable, no? Nung time na yun. Pero don't drink water from it now, no? Siyempre, hindi na malinis yun. So you can actually order, no, dun sa catalog at that time. So notice that it's a global link, no? Akala ko nga dati when I was young, it's specially designed for Manila, no? But it's not. There are several, no? There's one in Rio, there's one in Singapore, and other places across Europe. So another watershed event, no, in the 19th century was the introduction of electricity, no? A new source, no, of energy, no? Clean, no, energy. So the electric plant, no, which was in the early 1890s, no, 1892, no, provided, no, a clean source of energy to the residents of Manila. So, limitado lang yung gamit nito for lighting, no? And like electric fan. So, the power plant was found in Isla Provisor, no? Yun. Yan. So, look at the no? So, gumamit na ng no? So, you can actually, no, do things at night, no? Unimaginable before. So, electricity was a game changer, no? So many festivities were so the last hurrah, I think the last hurrah of the Spanish colonial regime was when it sponsored, no, the Exposición Regional Filipina, no? So which showcased the Philippines and its and the economic progress it had under Spain. So this exposition, no, today ito yung mga pavilion, no? Ito yung mga pavilion na itinayo doon to showcase the industrial, commercial, and cultural achievement, no, under Spain. So these pavilions, no, were constructed to display nga yung mga feat na yun ng ng Spanish regime. So the site, no, is now the PGH, no, and the UP, no, UP Manila. Okay? So these are the later on, these pavilions will become, itong pavilion na to ng ng exposition na to will be converted into a normal school, no, by the US, by the new colonial masters. So yun, no? So in the end, so the colonial regime, no, sponsored many innovation, no? Which paved the way, no, for Filipinos to experience industrialization and modernity, no? Which is a game changer, no? Which changed, no, lives in the late 19th century. So, but this modernity, no, will be more palpable with the advent of American colonialism in the Philippines. So, with that, maraming salamat and magandang hapon.
That was the presentation of Dr. Gerard, and I think there's a lot that we can glean from it. And among all of us, there are 120 of us watching via Zoom and FB Live, I think we have something that we'd like to ask probably from Dr. Gerard. If you have any, you can put them in the comment section of FB Live or Zoom, wherever you are watching. We're joined now by Dr. Gerard. Hi again. Hello.
Hi. Good afternoon again.
Alam mo ba, I think I should not be surprised that your presentations are the typical Gerard Lico presentations of showing a lot of examples. Ang daming halimbawa ng mga nangyari ng 300 years of Spanish colonization and 500 years of Christianity in the Philippines. From what I try to gather from your presentation, it seems like there are different forms of insertions of modernity during the Spanish rule. Via introduction of new materials in construction, via newer building typologies such as the sabungan, the lighthouse, and the pavilions that you showed, even through infrastructure for transportation and utilities, and even the insertion actually of works from foreign designers into the Philippine context within Spanish rule. And you also mentioned actually that 1884 is an important year. It's like a pivotal point during the Spanish rule in terms of modernity. But I actually, my real question here is, with all of this, were Filipinos just silent recipients of all these insertions of modernity, or did we have ways of trying to say that we're also part of this?
Mm-hmm. Of course naman, no? So it's a dialogic, no? Hindi naman tayo passive recipient lang, no? So there are things that we accept, no? Modify, appropriated, and some have been resisted, no? So isipin natin that colonial modernity is not a one-way, it's not a one-way street, but it's a dialogue. So colonial modernity, lagi ina-assume natin that it originates, no, from the metropole, colonial metropole, then it will trickle to the colonies. Pero hindi rin, may contribution din naman tayo sa development, no, ng colonial modernity. Take for example, no, so hindi ako lalayo, no? Nung Spanish period kasi, may ano, no? Yung mga Amerikano nandito na, no? So, yung isang ano doon, yung isang businessman doon may whaling, ano, no? Amerikano may whaling business sila, so nanguhuli sila ng mga whale. So, may architect siya na anak, no? And he observed, no, sa Pilipinas yung structural system ng bahay kubo, no? The structural system of the bahay kubo was actually the the inspiration, no, for the structural skeleton, no, of the first skyscraper in the world, no, which is in Chicago. No? So, yun, no, because when you say colonial modernity, the Philippines open up, no, to global trade. So, ibig sabihin, nag-participate na tayo sa global economy, no? So, yun yung so kaya nakikita natin yung semento nanggagaling sa Germany, sa UK, sa Hong Kong, no? Yung mga material na unseen before, no, can be nai-enjoy na natin. So nagkakaroon ng change talaga in architecture. So it paved the way for innovation, yung even yung paggamit ng steel, no, or asero, no? Talagang European nanggaling sa Europe. Ayun. Teka, ang ingay ng phone ko.
That's okay. I think they're also sending questions directly to you now. Yeah. You were talking about different materials as introduced. Actually, I have a question related to materials. John Paul Abiliera asks, in Lilo, Laguna, I noticed that the road leading to the church has been paved with red clay bricks. Were red clay bricks really used to pave roads during the Spanish colonial period?
Well, it depends, no? It depends. It depends on the context. I don't think na doon sa Laguna merong tradition of brick making, kasi brick making is limited to to areas like in Cagayan, no, and in Makati. Now, by the way, the first kilns, no, can be found in Makati, no. So sa Makati pinroduce yung mga ladrillo, no. So kasi sometimes we tend to romanticize, no, the past, no, by introducing nostalgic material doon sa lumang structure. So it defies authenticity. So we have to we have to look at talagang historical or archival material. If we are putting this material in all honesty, that existed in that place before. Otherwise, we are prone to myth making, no? Myth making na wala naman talaga siya originally doon. So in a way, putting bricks na hindi naman supported, putting bricks on a street na wala naman sa archival research, hindi talaga sinasabi sa archival research, it's like Disneyfying heritage sites, no, for tourism or nostalgic consumption.
But wouldn't that be like a strategy also that we could take it into advantage, that there are these myths, and then when people visit these heritage locations, they could find out for themselves whether it's something that they can believe in or if it can be disputed for them. What do you think about that?
Okay naman yun, no? Okay naman. Okay naman yun. Siguro we should inform, no? There are certain section na sasabihin mo sa publiko that this is an introduction, a contribution, no, of our generation in interpreting the heritage site. Kasi heritage, sites of heritage are interpreted, no, by the present generation for the consumption, for consumption of the general public, no, in the form of tourism, in the form of creative industry.
Actually, I was quite intrigued by your story about Gustav Eiffel. That you were saying false. You tried to dispute a particular myth, and that you were able to disprove that. But at the same time, I suddenly was interested with this.
Pero Maureen, kasi kasi pag nasasabi natin gawa ni Eiffel yan, talagang yung Pilipinas becomes part of this global network, no? Pero hindi naman talaga niya ginawa yung San Sebastian, si Genaro Palacios yun, no? Pero makikita natin na meron, dumating din naman yung mga bakal, no, na galing sa fountain niya. In fact, di ba, sinabi ko nga, maraming bridges, no? Maraming bridges, and even yung ano, no, kauna-unahang metal, no, steel lighthouse, no, sa may San Nicolas, no, near Pasig River, no, ay gawa talaga, no, sa foundry ni Eiffel. So it is ano, no, kailangan talaga magre-research ka kasi makikita mo siya sa catalog, official catalog of works ni Gustav Eiffel.
Yeah. And that's the purpose of the academe and researchers, in order to really get the story straight, to get history straight for all of us, to understand where we're really coming from, I think. We have another question, actually, from Ulysses Paredes. He asks, was the implementation of parks and gardens in Manila a way for the government then to implement some form of ecological conservation, or was it purely aesthetic?
In a way, ano, no, kasi nga you need to ano, no, you need to foster civic life, no? So yung Luneta, Jardin Botanico. So parks are spaces of leisure kasi remember at that time wala namang other forms of entertainment kundi mamasyal. Ang tawag nga dito paisahe, di ba? Promenade. So talagang ano, no, at the end of the day, bago bago lumubog ang araw, talagang mamamasyal ka, no? Mamamasyal ka sa parke, no? Sa plaza, no? Kasama ito sa ano kasi wala ngang forms of entertainment, walang kuryente, walang TV. Ang 'di ba nga ang TV nga noon ay dudungaw ka sa bintana mo. Panonoorin mo yung mga tao. So people watching ka.
Yeah.
So, 'di ba?
Yeah,
People
yeah,
watching,
yeah.
'di ba? Ganun ang ano, no? Pero katulad ng nasabi ko, may other purpose pa yung ano, no? For example, yung Jardin Botanico. Yung Jardin Botanico was really a colonial apparatus, no? To experiment on and to test the potential of plants, no? Both imported and endemic, no? Para ano, no, yung acclimatize sila, i-explore yung kanilang economic, medicinal, and other potential, no, economic potential ng mga plants na yon. So hindi lang unique to sa ano, no, sa Pilipinas, yung sa ano, 'di ba, sa Malaysia, yung rubber tree, no, yung Kew Garden, no, sa UK, mga ano yan, no,
Yeah.
mga kumbaga these are spaces na hindi masyado na pag-aaralan na nag-work dito ang ano, no, yung it's a space of colonialism, no?
So for colonialism to work, parang, from what I understand now from your descriptions, it starts off with a social space, and then everything else is actually a very positive consequence that happens. Parang ganun yata yung nangyayari. So it always starts off with this colonial agenda, but at the same time, it also has these positive impacts that not only the colonizer will enjoy, but apparently also the colonized.
Yeah. So kasi 'di ba, kasi in order for power to be more effective, it should be made invisible, no? And through the manipulation of spaces, doon ano, doon makikita yung ano, no, yung how authority is how the power of the authority is being transcoded through the spaces, no? As I mentioned nga, 'di ba, reorganize, no, create the city, no, create the township, no, based on the quadricula or grid, no, because it's a geometry that renders itself to ano, no, to easy surveillance, no. Tapos yung mga Pilipino, pag susuotin mo pa ng mga transparent na ano, no, na mga barong para ano, makikita mo if they are concealing weapons, no. So apart from the tropicality and transparency, may kinalaman ito sa pag-monitor ng native bodies, di ba?
Yeah.
Tapos lagi tayong may illusion na ano, no, na yung intramuros maganda, no. Ano, no, actually restricted na mga Pilipino doon, no. So paggabing sabi ko, talagang well protected siya paggabi at nandun ka pa, pwede kang barilin, no. Na meron silang license to kill if you are in that space because you should not be there. So very strict, no, very very rigid yung colonial society sa ano, no, sa pag-demarcate, no, ng spaces along ano, no, along racial lines, no?
So
kaya nga may Japanese district, may Chinese district, merong for Filipinos. So kasi mas madali mong makukontrol, no, yung mga tao kung ano, no, kung kinlasify mo sila doon sa space na yon.
So that's why you were saying that colonialism can be framed within spatial practice, that
Mhm.
that the colonizer can use space as a way, as a device, as a strategy in order to colonize in an efficient manner. That's what I'm
Yes,
gathering. And yeah,
yes.
I'm glad I understood it. We have another question now from Riel Gutierrez. How did the Spanish colonialism significantly influence our visual arts, especially for paintings and sculptures? So this time we're looking at other art forms in addition to architecture. Did the Spanish colonization any way influence other art forms in the Philippines?
Of course naman, no? Of course, malaki ang impluwensya yan. So of course, yung mga estilo, 'di ba sabi ko nga sa inyo initially, nung wala pa talagang formal education, yung mga European styles were interpreted based on on what we saw in style book, no? Kaya makikita nyo, approximation yung mga nasa simbahan, yung mga estilo doon, tsaka yung mga painting style. Mapapansin nyo, even in the 19th century, wala pang parang hindi pa masyado yung perspective, no? Parang hindi pa alam ng mga Pilipino, no, yung notion of perspective. Pero halimbawa, no, yung sa no, yung example natin yung trompe-l'oeil sa San Agustin, 'di ba? Ano
Mhm.
'yun, no? No, it was made possible, no, through the works of two Italian scenographers, no? So, meron talagang interaction yung European. So, it's a learning process, no? So, kung makikita nyo nga yung sinaunang mga santo, 'di ba, mukha silang mga anito, and later on madidevelop, and with yung mga Chinese craftsmen also will introduce their own brand, no, of interpreting your European style. So makikita natin, even yung mga santo would look like Chinese, no? Tapos may mga food dogs, no? May mga food dogs dun sa ano.
Yeah.
So in a way, the colonial space is very cosmopolitan, di ba?
And it shows off in different art forms, as you've been able to answer and inform the question of Brielle Gutierrez. How about another question, this time from Carl Angelo Lorin Bitawag? The question is, what significant innovations were showcased in the Exposición Regional Filipina in 1895?
Okay, you can see the catalog, no? It is accessible online. So marami doon, no?
Oh.
From taxidermy, kasi importante yung importante yung mga exposition, no? 'Di ba? It's a colonial it's a colonial spectacle, no, to celebrate the innovation, the technological tutelage, no, na nagawa nila, no, sa isang colonial space. It's a means to justify, no, that the colonial project had succeeded, no, in the process of civilizational dispensation, no? So kaya itong mga na to, apart from showcasing yung mga industrial innovation, no, yung mga ng crops, yung mga machineries, no, to process mga crops, yung mga cultural forms, no? Syempre mga painting. So it's everything, no? Hindi lang ako particularly no, kung ano yung mga innovation, hindi ko pa siya masyado na pag-aralan. So magandang i-revisit natin itong itong event na ito, no, noong 1895. So pero una nagtataka ako bakit merong may mudehar, no? Yung mudehar na na pavilion. Kasi ito yung ito yung pavilion ng ng Insular Tobacco Factory, 'di ba? Alam naman natin na mudehar yung arkitektura nito, medyo Moorish, no? 'Yun. Sige, it's a subject for a new research, no? What are those innovations?
We
Kasi we
draw
have a
inspiration
short
from our
time na.
audience. Yeah, yeah. Actually, si Carl Angelo Bitawag has another question. Are there innovations implemented and structures unique to the Spanish colonial Philippines that are particularly ahead of its time in Asia or other colonial built settlements?
Okay, yung isang yung paggamit nga ng ng iron, isa to, no. Di ba nga yung yung sinabi ko nga kanina, yung Puente Colhante, no, it's the first na suspension bridge in Asia, no. At saka yung no, yung San Sebastian, it is the only all steel, no? Prefabricated church in Asia. Yung isa, nasa Turkey. Pero sabi ko, di ba Turkey, Asia yon? Pero nasa kabilang side siya ng Bosphorus. So technically, nasa Europe siya. No?
Europe
So,
na.
dalawa, no? Dalawa ang importanteng all-steel church. No? Isa sa Pilipinas at isa yung nasa Turkey.
I guess this proves, as you were saying, how cosmopolitan the Philippines is. Even if we were a colony, even if we didn't have a direct say in how this would happen, at least we still had these ways of inputting our own mark into this cosmopolitan lifestyle. But at the same time, as you mentioned, 1834 is an important year because that was the introduction of other foreigners to come in through the Philippines because of the opening of the port. So I think this is very pivotal. This didn't happen in any other part of Asia, only in the Philippines.
Eh, meron naman, no? Kasi naman 'di ba ang function naman ng mga colonies is for extraction ng resources. So, meron din namang no sa East Indies, no, sa British colonies, no, sa Malaysia, no. Meron din namang mga ports, pero yung Pilipinas significant kasi nag-end yung monopoly, no? Nag-end ang monopoly at nag-open up ang Pilipinas sa iba't ibang klaseng trade, no? At nagkaroon ng influx, no, ng mga European investors. So
that's our place in history, in world history.
Nagkaroon ng shift, no, from purely feudal, nag-shift to industrialization, leading to capitalism. So capitalism na pagdating ng 20th century.
Okay. I think we have one more question now, this time from Daniel Cantor. He asks, most of the development then was mainly focused in Manila. What about the other regions? Was it also the same during that time?
Meron naman, no? So may mga port developments naman sa Cebu, sa Iloilo, no? Meron din naman pero hindi ganoong kasi mas mas obvious at saka mas malaki yung manifestation nito sa Maynila, no? Kasi yung railway system, no? 'Di ba? Yung railway system, yung yun, marami din, no? Marami ding improvement sa ibang lugar. Kasi kung makikita nyo sa archives, sa Spanish archives, the Spanish authorities, marami silang plano, no? Even halimbawa, we found the development of resorts, no, in Sibol, no? Alam niyo yung Sibol Spring in in Bulacan. So may mga iba-iba kasi ang mga requirement, no, ng colonial lifestyle. Apart from the economic, meron din mga leisure, no? Leisure spaces. So maganda kasi ang focus ko ngayon ay Maynila. Indeed, meron din mga naganap kasi hindi naman tayo puro Imperial Manila lang, no? Meron din namang meron din namang role yung kasi bakit ba nagtayo ng bakit ba nagtayo ng tren, no, ng train system Manila to Dagupan? Kasi nga para ma-penetrate mo yung hinterland. So kasi 'di ba yung tren it efficiently very efficient siya in terms of extraction of resources, no, in the colonized space, 'di ba? Mas madali mo siya. At saka yung tren, malapit siya sa port, no? Talagang ang is the extraction of resources ilabas agad sa no? 'Di ba? Magkalapit yung tutuban at saka yung yung port area, no? At ang consequence nga nito, 'di ba? Makikita mo yung urban development, nagkaroon ng mark, no? Increase in migration, no? Nagkaroon ng diaspora, no? So nagkaroon ng kaya yung 'di ba nabanggit natin kung mapapansin mo yung mga migrant workers nasa Tondo area, nandoon sa area na yun, at kaya nga dinivide yung city, no? Dinivide yung city into two zones. Kasi yung mga workers doon sa kabilang zone, yung mga industrial tsaka yung mga commercial nasa kabilang side para maiwasan yung kasi because nga the materiality of the houses of the laboring class, no, ay gawa sa highly flammable material, kaya kinailangan magkaroon ng divisoria, no? So parang may fire line break para walang maiwasan yung massive urban conflagration.
Yeah. Actually, from the way that I also gather it, although Manila was the capital of the colony, as long as you look for the plaza or the Plaza Mayor in any part of the country, that pretty much already becomes the flag or the indicator that there is Spanish presence. And I guess we can already deduce from that that some sort of development or insertions of modernity would have also occurred wherever we find a plaza in the Philippines.
Yeah, in a way, ano, no, para siyang mission, di ba? Mission, di ba? In
Mhm.
California, ganyan din naman ang ano, no? So makikita mo yung development. So it's the beginning of ano, no, yung mga township na to.
Yeah,
Nagkakaroon ng urban life, no? It will
yeah.
eventually develop into an urban ano, no, urban development.
Do we have room for just one more question? Actually, it's a continuation from Danielle Cantor. Just one more. Danielle asks, what is Gravito painting? Sorry, wait, let me say it again. Was it Gravito painting seen in some of the Spanish colonial houses presented in one of your slides?
What do you mean? Yung ano, painted sa
Yung
loob?
painting. Yeah.
Yeah, so of course, meron
Just
namang
be
ano.
like a mural?
Siyempre, those ano naman are important buildings, no? Mostly public or tsaka mga residents of the well-to-do. Talagang well-painted, no? By the way, no,
Yeah.
yung meron din tayong ano, no, misunderstanding na ang mga bahay na bato ay kulay puti, no? No? Alam niyo ba na hindi
Okay.
originally kasi actually yung mga bahay na bato even in Vican, no, hindi naman sila purely white. They are very colorful, no, using pastel hues, no? So there was a time lang, particularly ano, no, in one of the epidemics, yung puti kasi yung lime has a disinfecting property. So eventually na whitewash siya because during the pandemic or epidemic, yung white was a disinfectant, no? Oh, ayun another ano yun. Trivia. Okay.
Actually, that was interesting nga eh. Actually, you know what? There are so many questions that are coming in, but maybe we have room for one more, just one more, from Angelo Ray de la Cruz, asking, with the significant influence of the Chinese immigrants to Philippine architecture, could we still have the Bahay na Bato without the arrival of Spanish colonists? So it's like, what if question?
What if, historically determined na siya, no? Ang hirap sagutin. Hindi
Yeah.
din. Kasi because of ano, no? Because of ano, it's a consequence kasi of colonization, no? Yung migration, no? Yung influx ng Chinese population dito, no? For the infrastructural development. So the bahay na bato and the shop houses, no, yung mga chucheria, no, marami pang ano yan, no, marami pa. So actually you can download itong ano, no, yung itong lecture ko ngayon dun sa Espacio 6, no. I discuss colonial modernity from Spanish period to American period, no. So yung detalye nito makikita nyo, you can download it Espacio 6, no. It's available online. It's for free, no. Kung gusto niyo ng mas mapag-aralan palalo.
Yeah. I mean, I understand where all these questions are coming from. Sa dami namang halimbawa na pinakita po ninyo, parang each slide, each example has its own set of questions. If only we had more time. But Dr. Gerard, we want to say thank you for your time, for making this presentation for us and for answering our questions. Thank you so much. And that's about all the time we have for today. I would like to give everyone my heartfelt thanks for participating in the launch of OBRAS Arquitectónicas en Ultramar, Arquitectura Mestiza and the Built Environment of the Philippines webinar series. Join us again next week where our guest speaker, Dr. Pedro Luengo, will discuss the Filipino element, architecture in Manila between 1571 and 1800. To watch the other installments of this webinar series and to view our online exhibition, please visit our website, Obras Arquitectónicas en Ultramar.com. You can use the QR code or just look for that website, spell it out, or just look at the note there at the bottom of our screen. It's been a pleasure to be with you all. Again, thank you to Dr. Gerard. Thank you to all of the assistance that we received from the UP College of Architecture and the Office for Initiatives in Culture and the Arts. Again, thank you. Have a good evening. Buenas noches. Mabuhay.